Joining me now, Delaware Democratic Senator Chris Coons, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Welcome back, Senator. Good to have you.
Thanks, Shannon. It's always good to be on with you.
I want to start here with what Prime Minister Netanyahu said at the UN just days ago.
As long as Hezbollah chooses the path of war, Israel has no choice, and Israel has every right to remove this threat and return our citizens to their homes safely. And that's exactly what we're doing.
He went on to ask Americans to imagine what would happen if towns like El Paso and San Diego, border towns, were taking incoming fire, turned into complete ghost towns. He says American officials would not stand for that for a single day. And yet this administration continues to call for a ceasefire. You know, incoming has been happening since October 8th. Why should we ask them to stand down? Do you think that's the right thing to do?
Well, let's be clear, Shannon. Vice President Harris put out a forceful statement, as did President Biden, that I join in, saying that Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, is a murderous terrorist who had American blood on his hands from the attack on the American Marine barracks back in the 1980s. And he's killed thousands of innocent civilians, Lebanese, Syrian, as well as Israeli. And as you said in your question, they have been raining rockets and missiles onto northern Israel since October 7th. So I think Israel is justified in their strikes against Hezbollah. The call for a ceasefire is really because of a concern that a ground invasion of southern Lebanon by the IDF might well turn into a long and grinding war of attrition, and concerns that Iran may well now retaliate. But President Biden and Vice President Harris are clear that we will stand by our ally Israel and defend them against attacks by Iranian proxies or direct attacks by Iran.
Now, one of your GOP colleagues, Senator Ron Johnson, sees it differently. He says that Israel doesn't have the ability to fully trust us at this time. Here's what he said yesterday.
They always seem to want to throttle back Israel's ability and desire to defend itself. I think it's the very sad fact that Israel doesn't trust the United States under the leadership of President Biden and Vice President Harris. They just can't trust us.
They don't have to ask our permission, but there are things they're doing. We're finding out when they're actually in play or after the fact. What do you make of your colleague's assessment there that they can't trust us?
Ron's statement is just nonsense. No one has been stronger in coming to the defense of Israel, especially after the hateful attacks by Hamas on October 7th, than President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. In fact, in the first ever direct attack on Israel by Iran, the Biden-Harris administration coordinated a response by several of our close allies that ensured that none of the 300 missiles and drones that Iran launched at Israel hit any significant target or caused any major damage. We have stood by Israel faithfully and loyally throughout the entire period that there are repeated attacks by Hezbollah and by Hamas on the territory of Israel and by the Houthis on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. So they should trust us. There have been some moments of tension because they don't inform us of what they're doing before they do. There is some question, of course, about the number of civilian deaths in Gaza as that war has ground on. But the idea that there should be any question about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris standing strongly by Israel and their right to defend themselves from attack, just nonsense.
I want to turn to another foreign hotspot, which obviously is Ukraine and Russia. President Zelensky here in town asking for things this week, meeting with the candidates, meeting with the current administration. What he really wants is the ability to use Western weapons deeper into Russia. Putin out today, his spokesman for the Kremlin, saying they're considering changing their policy and their guidelines when it comes to the use of nuclear power. Is that a threat? Is it bluffing? What do you think that the administration should do with respect to allowing those weapons for further use into Russia?
Well, look, we need to be careful because Vladimir Putin has shown that he's willing to take risks and gambles. Most of the world did not expect him to engage in the full broad spectrum invasion of Ukraine back in 2022. And President Biden and Vice President Harris have masterfully assembled a global coalition of 50 countries to defend Ukraine, to support Ukraine in their fight for freedom. One of the more alarming things that President Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, have said is that they will somehow bring this war to an end in a day. And J.D. Vance in the Senate has questioned whether we should continue to support Ukraine's fight for freedom. I think it's important that we give them the weapons, the tools, and the freedom to use those weapons in order to win this war against Russia. But I respect that President Biden gets more detailed briefings than I do on the potential risks of escalation. And when President Putin makes threats to potentially use tactical nuclear weapons, he has a very tough balancing act to strike.
Well, were you encouraged by the meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky? Because they came out of it and seemed that they had met, had some kind of meeting of the minds, that they heard each other. I mean, President Trump said, it hasn't changed where he is overall on trying to get this thing ended. But even President Zelensky, and he talked with our Griff Jenkins too, sounded like he felt like it was a good meeting. I'm
glad they met. It's important that there be conversations between President Zelensky and both Republican and Democratic leaders of our nation and candidates to be the next president of our nation. But in the clip that you're showing right now, President Trump said, "I'm a very good friend of Putin's." And you could see Zelensky sort of stiffen up and go, well, I hope you're a better friend of Ukraine than you are a friend of Russia under Putin. So it was a strikingly awkward moment. Putin is a war criminal. Putin has carried out horrific attacks in Ukraine. We should not have a president of the United States saying that he is seeking to be a better friend of Vladimir Putin. Okay, well, I want to ask you before you go quickly about our own border, because we got numbers from ICE late in the week that showed a picture that was pretty shocking for most Americans, that there are hundreds of thousands of non-citizens here who have already been convicted of a crime and are not in ICE custody. That includes, by their numbers, more than 13,000 people convicted of homicide. Were those numbers a shock to you? And what can and should we be doing about people, get upset talking about mass deportations, but targeting people that have been convicted criminals, murderers, rapists? Should we not have an effort to get that done? Shannon, thanks for a chance to talk to that. Because that's a misleading number. Those 13,000 convicted of homicide, they may not be in ICE custody, but most of them are in prison, state, federal, or local prisons, and will be deported as soon as they finish serving their prison terms. Under the Biden-Harris administration, they have prioritized the deportation of those who've committed violent crimes and have in fact deported them at a 50% higher rate than under former President Trump, who didn't make that a key priority. If we had been able to pass the tough bipartisan border security deal that my friends Senator Langford and Murphy and Sinema negotiated, we would have $20 billion more being invested in deportations and be prioritizing the deportation of violent criminals, something all of us should want. That bill didn't pass only because former President Trump called his allies in the Senate and said, don't pass it. He wanted an issue, not a solution. Okay, well, Vice President Harris has made it clear she would sign that bill into law. As you know, many of your Republican colleagues said they would not have voted for it anyway because they felt it contained many magnets to bring people here, work permits and other things, and codified a flow that they already think is out of control. And they ask questions about, if we're not enforcing current law, why would we enforce that bill if it was passed? We'll see. If she becomes president, if you guys hold the Senate, maybe it comes up for another vote, and we'll be watching that. Senator Coons. It will, and it'll make us stronger. Thank you very much, Shannon. Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.